October 26th, 1818. Another day in Tombstone, Arizona, where silver lured the hopeful and luck decided their fate. Cowboys from the Clanton and McLaury ranches gathered near the OK Corral, checking their Colt revolvers with the casual confidence of men who had never lost a street fight. They laughed among themselves, trading stories and rumors that seemed too absurd to be true. Down Fremont Street walked Wyatt Earp, a lawman with a steady stride and a 10-gauge Wells Fargo coach gun, gripped tight, both barrels loaded, both hammers cocked. Not a weapon for show or ceremony. This was a message to the Cowboys. It was a coward's tool, a violation of every unwritten rule that governed how men faced death in the West. A shotgun, they thought, had no place in an honorable fight. What they couldn't see, what no one could, was how wrong they were about what was coming next. Frontier faith. The American frontier created its own mythology around the revolver, transforming a mechanical tool into something approaching religious doctrine. Cowboys and gunfighters didn't just carry the Colt single-action army because it was effective, though it certainly could be in the right hands. They carried it because the revolver represented everything they believed about themselves: individual skill, personal courage, and the ability to face another man on equal terms with nothing but reflexes and nerve determining the outcome. The quick-draw duel became the ultimate test of masculine worth. Even though actual historical accounts of such encounters are remarkably scarce in the documentary record, what mattered wasn't whether these duels happened frequently, but that everyone believed they defined frontier justice. You faced your enemy in the street, hands hovering near holstered weapons, and when the moment came, you drew faster and shot straighter than the other man. The weapon itself became an extension of the shooter's character, requiring years of practice to master and constant maintenance to keep functional. The Colt Peacemaker held 6 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition and could hit a man-sized target at 25 yards if the shooter possessed sufficient skill and steady nerves. But effective accuracy in actual combat situations, with adrenaline flooding the system and return fire incoming, dropped that range considerably. Most gunfights happened at distances where you could read the expression on your opponent's face, and the difference between life and death came down to fractions of a second and inches of deviation. This created an entire culture around marksmanship, fast draw practice, and the ritualized performance of masculine capability. The unspoken rules were clear and universally understood across the frontier. You announced your intentions, you gave your opponent a chance to draw, and you settled the matter with equal weapons at similar range. Ambushes were the tactics of cowards and criminals, while shooting an unarmed man or using overwhelming firepower against a single opponent marked you as someone without honor. These weren't written laws, but social contracts enforced through reputation and community judgment. When word spread that Wyatt Earp intended to confront the Cowboys while carrying a shotgun instead of a revolver, it struck many observers as fundamentally wrong. The shotgun was industrial, impersonal, and brutally effective in ways that seemed to violate the entire philosophy of frontier combat. It required no particular skill to use, offered no chance for the target to demonstrate courage or ability, and turned the sacred ritual of the duel into something closer to an execution. The Cowboys weren't just confident they would win the coming confrontation. They were morally certain that Earp had already lost by choosing such a dishonorable weapon. They were about to learn that Wyatt Earp had never subscribed to their code in the first place, and that difference in philosophy would prove absolutely fatal. If you're drawn to the real stories behind the legend, subscribe now. Tactical Heresy, Wyatt Berry. Stapp Earp came from a background that prepared him to think about violence in fundamentally different terms than the Cowboys who mocked his choice of weapon. Before he became a lawman in Tombstone, he had worked as a buffalo hunter on the Great Plains, where success meant killing as many animals as efficiently as possible, with no romantic illusions about fair combat. He had served as a railroad guard, protecting cargo from bandits who attacked in groups and from concealment, teaching him that actual violence bears little resemblance to formalized duels. His experience as a deputy marshal in Dodge City and Wichita reinforced a single operational principle that would define his entire approach to law enforcement: end the threat immediately, using whatever tools provide the highest probability of survival. The 10-gauge shotgun that Earp carried that October afternoon represented a completely different philosophy of combat than the revolver culture embraced by the Cowboys. Where the Colt required precision marksmanship and multiple accurate shots to guarantee stopping an opponent, the shotgun delivered devastating results with merely approximate aim. Each barrel contained multiple buckshot pellets that spread into a cone of destruction, meaning the shooter needed only to point in the general direction of the target, rather than achieving pinpoint accuracy under stress. The ballistic mathematics were brutally straightforward and overwhelmingly favored the shotgun in close-quarters confrontation. A 10-gauge shell fired approximately 12 to 15 lead balls, each roughly 30 caliber in diameter, at velocities exceeding 1,200 feet per second. At distances under 15 feet, these projectiles remained tightly grouped enough to create a single devastating wound channel through the human torso. At ranges up to 40 feet, the pattern spread to roughly 18 inches in diameter, meaning even a shot aimed at center mass would likely strike vital organs, major blood vessels, or structural bone. Comparing the two weapons revealed just how massive the tactical advantage actually was. The Colt revolver gave you 6 chances to hit a target, moving laterally or seeking cover, with each shot requiring conscious aim and trigger control while managing recoil and muzzle rise. The shotgun gave you 2 chances to obliterate anything within a cone of fire, roughly 3 feet wide, with recoil that, while substantial, didn't matter, because both barrels could be discharged almost simultaneously. Missing with a revolver meant wasting precious time and ammunition, while your opponent potentially landed a fatal shot. Missing with a shotgun at distances under 20 feet required incompetence bordering on the miraculous. Earp's tactical doctrine rejected the entire premise of the fair fight that Cowboys considered sacrosanct to their identity. He had no interest in testing his draw speed against men who had spent years practicing that specific skill, because he understood that even winning such contests meant accepting significant personal risk. He had no investment in proving his courage through ritualized combat, because courage without survival was simply pointless death. What he wanted was maximum probability of ending the confrontation before his opponents could effectively return fire, and the coach gun delivered exactly that capability. The Cowboys interpreted Earp's weapon choice as evidence of fear or weakness, unable to comprehend that he was operating from an entirely different framework for understanding violence. They saw the shotgun as dishonorable because it eliminated the element of personal skill that gave them status and identity. Earp saw the shotgun as the only rational choice, because it turned combat into a problem of proximity rather than marksmanship. And he intended to control the distance at which the fight occurred. They wanted a duel that would demonstrate their superiority. He wanted an engagement that would end before they could draw their weapons. The Cowboys believed the gun you carried defined who you were as a man. Wyatt Earp believed the gun you carried determined whether you went home alive, and everything else was irrelevant mythology. When these two incompatible philosophies collided on Fremont Street, the result would validate one doctrine completely while destroying the other forever. Instant apocalypse. On October 26, 1881, 6 cowboys, aligned with the Clantons and McLaurys, waited behind the OK Corral, hands hovering near revolvers. The Earps approached from Fremont Street in formation, Virgil leading with a walking stick and pistol, flanked by Wyatt, Morgan, and Doc Holliday. Wyatt Earp moved to Virgil's right, with the Wells Fargo coach gun held low but ready, both hammers already cocked. Morgan, Earp, and Doc Holliday flanked the left side, both armed with revolvers, and Holliday reportedly carrying a short-barreled shotgun beneath his coat. What is absolutely certain is that the Cowboys refused to surrender their weapons, and accounts differ on whether it was Frank McLaury or Billy Clanton, made a movement toward his holstered revolver. The precise sequence of the next 30 seconds would be reconstructed from physical evidence, autopsy reports, and witness testimony that often contradicted itself wildly. Wyatt Earp raised the 10-gauge shotgun and fired both barrels at Tom McLaury from a distance later measured at less than 12 feet. The buckshot pattern had not yet begun to spread significantly at such close range, meaning all 12 to 15 pellets struck McLaury's torso in an area roughly the size of a man's fist. The autopsy later revealed massive trauma to the right side of the chest cavity, with pellets penetrating the lung, liver, and several major blood vessels. McLaury was blown backward by the kinetic energy transfer, which at that range approached being struck by a small automobile. He collapsed into the street and would die within minutes, though he remained conscious long enough to understand what had happened to him. The psychological impact of watching a man disintegrate from shotgun fire at close range cannot be overstated. When analyzing what happened next, the Cowboys had expected a revolver duel where skill and nerve determined the outcome. Instead, they witnessed industrial-scale destruction, delivered faster than human reaction time could process. Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton began firing their revolvers rapidly, but without the focused accuracy they might have achieved under different circumstances. Bullets struck Virgil Earp in the calf and Morgan Earp in the shoulder, while one round hit Doc Holliday's holster, but failed to penetrate. The fight continued with both sides firing as rapidly as they could operate their weapons, but the coordinated doctrine of the Earp faction maintained cohesion, while the Cowboys' individual courage began to fragment under sustained fire. Morgan Earp shot Billy Clanton in the chest, while Wyatt Earp's revolver rounds, he had dropped the empty shotgun and transitioned to his Colt, struck Frank McLaury in the abdomen. Doc Holliday fired his shotgun and possibly his revolver, though the chaos made definitive attribution impossible for every shot fired during the engagement. When the shooting finally stopped, 3 cowboys lay dead or dying in the street. 2 lawmen had sustained wounds that would require weeks to heal, and the entire confrontation had lasted approximately 30 seconds from first shot to final silence. Ike Clanton and Billy Claiborne had fled without firing their weapons, their reputations as dangerous men evaporating as thoroughly as their courage under actual fire. The bodies of Tom McLaury, Frank McLaury, and Billy Clanton were photographed for the newspapers, their wounds documented and their weapons examined to determine how many rounds each had fired. The evidence was conclusive and devastating to the mythology the Cowboys had embodied. Courage and skill with a revolver had proven utterly inadequate against coordinated tactics and superior firepower doctrine. What happened in that vacant lot would ripple outward through the entire structure of frontier justice, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Industrial justice. The immediate aftermath of the Corral gunfight saw Tombstone's established power structures begin to crack and realign around a new understanding of how force actually functioned. The Cowboys had controlled significant portions of Cochise County through a combination of political connections, intimidation tactics, and the widespread belief that they were too dangerous to confront directly. Their reputation rested on the assumption that individual courage and skill with firearms made them effectively invincible against any lawman willing to face them openly. That assumption died with Tom McLaury in the dust of Fremont Street. Wells Fargo, which had been losing substantial amounts of money to stagecoach robberies throughout the Arizona territory, immediately recognized the tactical implications of what had occurred. Within months, the company standardized the practice of equipping guards with short-barreled shotguns rather than relying primarily on revolvers for defense. The reasoning was identical to Earp's doctrine. Guards needed weapons that would end confrontations immediately without requiring extensive marksmanship training or exposing the company to liability from prolonged gunfights that might injure passengers or bystanders. Deputy marshals and town constables across the frontier territories began adopting similar approaches, recognizing that the romantic mythology of the revolver duel bore almost no relationship to the actual requirements of law enforcement. Records from various territorial governments show a marked increase in requisitions for shotguns and repeating rifles during the 1880s, with corresponding decreases in emphasis on training officers for quick-draw techniques. The professional consensus shifted toward overwhelming firepower and coordinated tactics rather than individual prowess with sidearms. The cultural impact extended beyond just law enforcement procurement decisions. Newspapers across the Western Territories covered the Tombstone incident extensively, with editorial commentary often focusing on whether Earp's tactics had been honorable or merely effective. The fact that this question even needed to be debated publicly indicated how thoroughly the incident had challenged the prevailing mythology. Some commentators praised the efficiency of ending a dangerous confrontation quickly. Others lamented the death of the traditional code of the West. What none could dispute was that efficiency had achieved complete tactical victory. Mining companies and railroad corporations, which controlled increasingly large portions of the Western economy, overwhelmingly sided with the Earp doctrine. These enterprises needed stability and predictable security, rather than romantic notions of individual honor. They employed security forces that operated under rules of engagement, emphasizing suppression of threats through coordinated firepower rather than fair fights. The practical requirements of protecting industrial assets proved incompatible with cowboy mythology, and economic incentives ensured that practical requirements would ultimately prevail. The reckoning was approaching, not just for the cowboys, but for everything they represented about how the frontier understood courage, honor, and the proper relationship between men and violence. Mythic afterlife. The final accounting from that October afternoon in Tombstone revealed numbers that seemed almost absurd in their disparity. 3 cowboys dead, 2 lawmen wounded but recovering, 0 arrests because the cowboys had been killed rather than captured, and an entire philosophy of frontier justice effectively invalidated in the span of 30 seconds. The Earps faced murder charges that dragged through a preliminary hearing lasting nearly a month, with Judge Wells Spicer ultimately ruling that the killings had been justified acts of law enforcement rather than criminal homicides. The legal verdict carried an implicit message that would boom through territorial governance. Efficient violence executed under color of legal authority was not murder, but rather the proper function of an organized state, and the distinction between the two rested entirely on who held institutional power. The romantic mythology of the fair fight had no place in this framework, because the state's interest lay in ending confrontations decisively, rather than testing the courage of its representatives. The cowboys had died believing they were defending their honor. The law ruled that their honor had been completely irrelevant to the question of whether killing them was justified. By 1890, the federal government officially declared the American frontier closed, with settlement patterns and population density no longer supporting the designation of any region as genuinely wild territory. By 1900, most Western towns had implemented and were actively enforcing ordinances against open carry of firearms, effectively criminalizing the entire culture that had made the revolver such a potent symbol. The transition from frontier chaos to bureaucratic order happened faster than many observers expected, driven largely by economic interests that found predictability more profitable than adventure. The OK Corral marked a turning point, not because it was the deadliest or most significant gunfight in Western history, it was neither, but because it demonstrated so clearly that systemic approaches to violence would always defeat individual courage. When the two came into direct conflict, the cowboys brought skill, nerve, and absolute confidence in their own superiority. The Earps brought doctrine, coordination, and weapons chosen for functional efficiency rather than symbolic resonance. Only one of these approaches proved adequate to the demands of actual combat. Wyatt Earp lived until 1929, surviving long enough to watch Hollywood create an entirely fictional version of the West that romanticized precisely the mythology he had spent his career systematically dismantling. The movies portrayed quick-draw duels and honorable gunfighters facing each other at high noon, while the actual history showed ambushes, shotguns, and coordinated posses, executing arrest warrants with overwhelming force. The mythology proved far more commercially appealing than the documentary reality, and Earp spent his final years giving interviews where he tried unsuccessfully to correct the record. If this video made you see history in a new light, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel.